Singularity is quite easily one of the most overlooked and underappreciated games on the PS3. It's essentially a first-person shooter that all revolves around the concept of time travel. The story picks up on the tiny island of Katorga 12, where a strange mineral known as E99 is being discovered. It's not long before it's being researched, which ultimately ends in a disaster. As you would expect, other nations get wind of the accident and send a team of soldiers to investigate what went down. This is where the player comes in and takes up the role of Nathaniel Renko. Upon arriving, it's clear that not everything is as it seems. Now, I won't go into too much detail about the narrative, as it's simply one of the best aspects of the adventure, but thankfully the minute-to-minute gameplay is also up to the task. A huge range of both weaponry and abilities litter the experience, with each of them bringing something new to the table. From standard revolvers and rifles to more impressive options such as the TMD. It plays very much like the gravity gun from Half-Life and fits perfectly into the world of Singularity. By combining these abilities and gunplay, it creates many unique scenarios that help the game shine. I'm sure there's players out there that will completely write it off due to its reliance on the games that have inspired it, but in reality it manages to forge its own path and ends up creating its own identity in the process. This is one that I highly recommend. When it comes to racing games, the PlayStation 3 is no slouch. With the likes of Ridge Racer 7 and Gran Turismo 6, the console is not short on quality races, but one that managed to stand out amongst them was a little game known as Split-Second Velocity. What made it unique was its setup. Instead of setting out as a driver and slowly adding to your collection of vehicles, you take part in a sort of reality TV show and play the role of a contestant, where the goal is to simply make it around the track without getting blown to smithereens. The game is your typical arcade racer with a huge twist. You blow stuff up to take other rivals out. It's known as the power play mechanic and takes the form of a gauge that must be filled up by your reckless driving. From drifting to drafting or catching air, each contribute to the gauge, and once it's full, this is where you can start to manipulate the environment around you. Falling cranes to helicopters shooting up the road. There's an insane amount of options that all create mayhem on the track. Of course, the core gameplay is tight and responsive as well. Each car possesses its own unique traits that offer a real difference once in a race. And as you would expect with any racer, there's a ton of different modes to get stuck into. From survival to time attack, and of course the main attraction being the season mode that allows you to unlock several new vehicles and parts that can be used right across the game. If you're looking for a fun, balls to the wall racer, Split-Second Velocity has got you covered. The PS3 was home to a wide range of open world games, but one that stood out amongst the sea of releases was the Saboteur. The most unique aspect was its setting, with it all taking place in a German-occupied Paris, with players assuming the role of Sean Devlin, an Irish mechanic turned street racer who ends up becoming part of the French resistance. Now, the gameplay is structured like many open world games and sees you taking on a variety of missions from driving to infiltration or outright mayhem. They all offer up a decent amount of variety, and thanks to the range of weaponry and options at your disposal, it never becomes a mundane affair. Now, you may have noticed that several sections of the game are represented in black and white. This aesthetic ties into the world map, with several locations acting as towers. Once you take out the enemies that occupy these spaces, a vibrant and lush wave of colour encapsulates the environment, and in my opinion offers a really nice way of communicating which parts of the map have yet to be opened up by the player. Overall, the Saboteur is quite easily one of the best open world games on the system. It's nothing revolutionary and doesn't beat the likes of Grand Theft Auto or Assassin's Creed, but what it sets out to do, it more than succeeds. Tokyo Jungle is one of those games that is quite divisive. You're either going to love its take on a post-human Earth or absolutely loathe its gameplay and find fault with its premise. I for one think Tokyo Jungle is a severely underrated game that deserved much more recognition than it received. Now, it essentially has two different modes, one being the story and the other known as survival. The goal is to play as an animal and survive post-apocalyptic Tokyo and see how many years your bloodline can survive. This involves getting food, avoiding predators and mating to continue on to the next generation. Depending on the animal you play as, the gameplay can be quite different. Predators can hunt other animals and need meat to survive, and can stealthily hunt by hiding in grass and sneaking up on their prey, then delivering a quick kill shot, or by running rampant attacking larger beasts or other predators. As a herbivore, you have to find plants to eat and avoid being attacked by other predators. As you hunt your prey or eat your plants, your food in the area will dwindle, causing you to migrate across the map in search of more food, which keeps the game interesting as the food hotspots vary when you play. The adventure provides you with a tremendous amount of different animals to play as. Some are large and strong but require lots of food, while others are small and frail but easy to escape predators and need very little to eat. As I said, you're either going to love or hate it, but for what Tokyo Jungle offers up, it's something that I highly recommend. 3D.Game Heroes is a game that's clearly aimed at a specific audience. Nobody can deny that it's a nod to the original Legend of Zelda, with some even going as far to say it's a blatant ripoff, and even though there may be some truth to that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The first aspect to get out of the way are the incredible visuals. As the title of the game itself indicates, everything in the world is made up of 3D dots or cubes, if you will. It takes on a sort of retro feel as you make your way through each environment, but at the same time there's a very high level of detail, such as reflections which are beautifully crafted, as well as a whole string of particle effects that light up the screen. Jumping into gameplay right at the start, you get to create your own avatar, with a surprising amount of variety being afforded to the player. The narrative sees you setting out to obtain several items that were sealed away long ago, but once again have been unleashed upon the kingdom, and it's up to you to locate them and bring an end to the destruction that they have brought about. Now when it comes to combat, your sword plays a huge role. There's quite a few to earn or find throughout the journey, which all possess a varying degree of power. They each have several attributes, including length, spin, special and strength, with them all being able to be upgraded to add even more options to your arsenal. Between side quests, exploration, events and minigames, this game offers up quite a bit of replayability. Overall, it takes a classic formula, renews it and kicks new life into it. It won't be for everyone, but for those that it clicks with, it'll be hard to put down. At first, Dark Sector will likely seem like another run-of-the-mill third-person shooter, but hiding underneath is a truly competent and engaging adventure that manages to stand out amongst the similar games of this nature on the PS3. What makes the overall gameplay interesting is the inclusion of something known as the glaive system, which serves as the main mechanic for players to utilize throughout the journey. It's essentially a boomerang that mainly serves as a weapon, but also plays the part in solving many distinct environmental puzzles. Combat relies upon the glaive, as well as several firearms and hand-to-hand combat. Performing combos and utilizing each part of your inventory is the quickest way to handle enemies, and once certain conditions have been met, you'll be able to execute devastating special attacks that really help out in tight situations. It all comes together to create a deeply satisfying system that manages to make each engagement one of the clear highlights of the experience. If this one passed you by when it first released, its distinctive take on the genre is something that should not be missed. Enslaved Odyssey is a game that is unfortunately largely being forgotten about. It released quite early during the generation and never really managed to create an impact. The story is the journey of a young man who was, well, enslaved, and you start off aboard a crashing ship trying to escape before the ship's final crash. It's during this set piece that you run into a young woman, Trip, who soon becomes your companion on the journey. The two work together to navigate the post-apocalyptic environment that throws many obstacles at the player to overcome. Largely thanks to the climbing system, it's possible to navigate each location in a sort of uncharted fashion. Mixing this aspect of the gameplay with the pretty robust combat results in a challenging but rewarding loop that will keep even the most proficient of players on their toes. What makes it even better is the inclusion of several RPG elements that give the player the opportunity to upgrade several aspects of their character, both when it comes to offensive actions as well as defensive abilities that really come into play as the adventure unfolds. Overall, Enslaved Odyssey offers up an engrossing journey that won't hit with everyone that plays it, but in its own right, it's something that is well and truly worth experiencing. Now, Leia has a sort of checkered history. It was one of the most anticipated games for the PS3, but upon its release it was completely discarded due to several issues with the core gameplay. At the time, Sony were pushing its then new gyro function of the DualShock 3, which became an integral part of the gameplay. Now I'll be the first to admit that it was a pretty bad call, but thankfully the developers heard the cries of many and decided to update the game with traditional controls, which completely changed the experience. The narrative sees us being introduced to a kingdom which is torn between two separate beliefs. The use of dragons as war machines has become the norm, with the player filling the role of a knight that pilots one of these beasts. As the story plays out, you learn why the world is the way it is, and what side is really the correct side. Now the gameplay is what really helps Leia stand out. From aerial battles to ground-based skirmishes, there's plenty of variety when it comes to fulfilling your objective. Now there's only about 15 levels that make up the journey, but each of them offer up something fresh for the player to take on. It is quite short, but it doesn't detract from the overall experience. If you've got the patience to get used to the rather unorthodox control setup, Leia is well worth checking out. Dante's Inferno is a hack and slash that wears its inspiration on its sleeves. The likes of Rygar and God of War clearly inspired the developers behind it, and as they say, copying is the biggest form of flattery. It's nowhere near on the level of the games that influence it, but it still offers up a competent experience that fans of the genre will likely enjoy. It sees you filling the role of Dante as you set out to save your wife from the depths of hell. The story has its highs and lows, but mostly highs, with the main story arc being fairly interesting, as you get to see what exactly Dante did in his past, as well as all the various levels of hell and who resides there. Within gameplay is where Dante's Inferno really begins to shine. As you would expect, you have a selection of weapons at your side to help deal with the onslaught of Hell's minions, with the most prominent being a scythe, as well as a cross attack that forms the basis of the combat. The goal is to simply rack up combos with the more you hit, dealing out the extra damage, but perhaps the most interesting part of the gameplay is the fact that you can punish or absolve certain enemies. You can do this when you put enough damage into them, leading to a unique grab attack where you can choose to punish or absolve. After you've made your choice, you'll get either red or blue orbs, which will then level up your unholy or holy paths respectively. Each new level that you obtain on these paths gives you access to new abilities that are completely unique to your choices. This provides a nice amount of replay value, as you can then get to play through the adventure again with a whole series of different abilities. All in all, Dante's Inferno is well worth playing. Resonance of Fate is a JRPG that introduces players to a distorted version of the future. It takes on a sort of steampunk aesthetic and was clearly developed with a Western audience in mind. Now the story is one of the weaker aspects of the game, and doesn't really offer anything groundbreaking for the three protagonists that make up the adventure. Each of them do offer their own advantages and uses throughout the journey though, and this is mainly during battle. These encounters are all based around modern guns and weaponry, and blend real-time action and elements of turn-based combat to create something entirely unique. The action takes place much like it would in a first-person shooter. However, aiming is completely automatic, and the way each battle plays out is all tied to player movement. If you simply just stand still, nothing will happen, which does offer moments of downtime in order to conjure up a strategy. Once you begin to move though, so do the enemies, and thanks to a wide array of abilities and options, you'll never be at a loss as to what to do. Despite some distinct problems, Resonance of Fate is undoubtedly one of the better console JRPGs of the generation. Sadly, I cannot in good faith claim that it's an unrivaled masterpiece. It is, however, a tremendously inventive game that made great strides in breaking JRPGs out of their established rut, while still remaining true to their roots. Well, that does it for today's video. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button and help me reach my goal of 50k by the end of the year. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos as well, and to take part in giveaways. You can also join our growing community on Discord and meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve and Paddy J, for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're at all interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I will catch you next time.